Time is the ultimate concealer of secrets. It buries evidence under layers of earth and dust, silences witnesses with the finality of death, and transforms a crime scene into a quiet archaeological landscape. We place our faith in forensics, in the power of science to illuminate the truth, to give a voice to the voiceless and bring justice to the wronged. But what happens when the trail of evidence is not just cold, but frozen in time for millennia? What happens when the victim lived and died before the written word, before the concept of a police investigation, before the very civilizations we study in history books? These are the ultimate cold cases. Murders committed in the deep past, so ancient that the motives, the methods, and the murderers themselves are lost to a world we can barely comprehend. Yet they leave behind their silent witnesses, the bodies themselves. Through the remarkable power of modern science, we can now interrogate these ancient remains. We can analyze their bones, their tissues, their DNA, and even the contents of their last meals. We can reconstruct the final violent moments of their lives with astonishing clarity. But for every answer science provides, it unearths a dozen more questions, creating mysteries that are deeper and more profound than any modern whodunit. These are not just stories of death. They are stories of life in a brutal and unforgiving world. They reveal the dark undercurrents of power, jealousy, ritual, and rage that have been part of the human experience since its very beginning. They show us that while our technology has changed, our capacity for violence has remained terrifyingly constant. Tonight, we open the case files on 5 of history's most bizarre and shocking ancient murders. We will travel from the frozen peaks of the Alps to the misty bogs of Denmark, from the opulent courts of Egyptian pharaohs to the quiet farming villages of Neolithic Europe. We will follow the clues, examine the evidence, and confront the unsettling truths that still shock the historians and scientists who study them. These are the victims of antiquity, whose final stories are still waiting to be told. Our journey into the abyss of ancient crime begins not in a dusty archive or a sterile laboratory, but on a high, remote ridge in the Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. The date is September 19, 1991. 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, are trekking off the main path, seeking a shortcut down the mountain after a long day. The landscape is stark and breathtakingly beautiful, a world of rock, ice, and thin, cold air. But as they navigate a gully filled with melting glacial ice, they spot something unusual. Sticking out of the ice and slush is the head and shoulders of a human body. The skin is a yellowish brown, taut and leathery, like old parchment. Their initial assumption is a tragic but modern one, a lost mountaineer, a victim of a climbing accident who has been preserved in the ice. They report their discovery to the authorities, and a recovery operation begins. The process is difficult, hampered by the high altitude and bad weather. The body is awkwardly frozen into the ice, and the recovery team, believing it to be a modern forensic case, uses pneumatic drills and ice picks to free it. In the process, they inadvertently damage the remains, a fact that would later cause much consternation among archaeologists. When the body is finally airlifted from the mountain and brought to the medical examiner's office in Innsbruck, Austria, the true nature of the discovery begins to dawn on the experts. The artifacts found with the body are unlike anything they have ever seen. There is an axe with a blade not of steel, but of a burnished, reddish metal. There are arrows with flint heads, a deerskin quiver, and a backpack made from a wooden frame. This was no modern hiker. An archaeologist named Konrad Spindler is called in to examine the finds. As he lays out the strange, primitive tools, a profound realization washes over him. Based on the typology of the copper axe, he makes a bold and astonishing declaration. The body is not decades old, not even centuries old. It is, he estimates, at least 4,000 years old. The world is stunned. The media dubs him Ötzi the Iceman, after the Ötztal Alps where he was found. Subsequent radiocarbon dating would prove Spindler's estimate to be conservative. Ötzi had died sometime between 3350 and 3105 BCE, during the Copper Age. He was a contemporary of the builders of Stonehenge and lived a full 2 millennia before the Roman Empire was even a whisper on the wind. He was and remains the oldest naturally preserved human mummy ever discovered in Europe, an unprecedented time capsule from a lost world. For the first decade of his modern existence, Ötzi's story was believed to be one of tragedy, but not of malice. The prevailing theory was that he had been caught in a sudden storm high in the mountains. Perhaps he had fallen, sustained a head injury, and laid down to rest in a sheltered gully, never to wake up. The snow and ice then entombed him, preserving him perfectly for the next 5,300 years. It was a compelling and poetic narrative of man versus nature. But science, in its relentless pursuit of detail, would eventually reveal a far more sinister story. In 2001, 10 years after his discovery, a radiologist named Paul Gosner was examining a new set of X-ray images of the Iceman. He was looking for routine details, signs of disease or broken bones, when his eyes caught a tiny anomalous shadow in Ötzi's left shoulder, something that had been missed in all previous examination. It was a small, dense object lodged deep within the tissue near the Iceman's back. It looked suspiciously like a projectile. A subsequent, more detailed CT scan confirmed the finding with chilling clarity. Buried in Ötzi's shoulder was a flint arrowhead. He had been shot from behind. The tragic accident was now a murder investigation, and Ötzi was not just a victim of the elements, but the victim of a 5,300-year-old homicide. This single discovery changed everything. The focus of the research shifted from archaeology to forensics. A team of scientists, including pathologists, radiologists, and forensic anthropologists, began to re-examine every inch of the Iceman's body, treating him as the central piece of evidence in a prehistoric cold case. What they would uncover would paint a picture of a man's desperate final days, culminating in a violent, calculated ambush. The arrowhead itself was the smoking gun. It had entered his back from a significant distance, estimated to be around 30 meters, or nearly 100 feet. This was not a close-quarters fight. This was an attack from a hidden assailant. The angle of entry suggested the shooter was positioned below Ötzi, firing upwards as he moved across the mountain pass. The shot was devastatingly effective. The flint point had torn through his back, severing the subclavian artery, a major blood vessel that supplies blood to the arm. An injury like this would have caused massive internal bleeding. He would have gone into shock almost immediately and would have likely bled to death in a matter of minutes. The Iceman's final moments were not a peaceful drift into an icy sleep, but a brutal, swift, and agonizing end. But the arrowhead wasn't the only evidence of violence. A closer look at the body revealed a deep, unhealed cut on his right hand, between his thumb and forefinger. This was a classic defensive wound, the kind a person gets when trying to grab the blade of an attacker's weapon. Analysis of the tissue around this wound showed signs of healing, indicating it was inflicted 1 to 2 days before his death. This meant that the final, fatal ambush was not an isolated event. Ötzi had been involved in a violent confrontation shortly before he fled into the mountains. Furthermore, the CT scans and revealed the arrowhead also showed evidence of a significant head injury. There was a dark spot on the back of his brain, consistent with a cerebral hemorrhage. For a long time, it was debated whether this was caused by a fall after he was shot or by a separate blow. More recent analysis of brain proteins suggests the latter. He was likely struck on the head, or his head was slammed against a rock by his assailant after he had been incapacitated by the arrow. This collection of injuries paints a grim picture. Ötzi was in a fight for his life. He was wounded, but he managed to escape his initial attacker or attackers. He then fled, climbing high into the unforgiving alpine environment, a place he likely knew well. But he was being pursued. and as he crossed a high mountain pass, his pursuer, hiding below him, took careful aim and fired a single, deadly arrow into his back. The forensic evidence had answered the question of how Ötzi died, but it opened up the much larger and more difficult question, why? To understand the motive, investigators had to build a profile of the victim. Who was this man? What was his life like? And who would have wanted him dead? Ötzi was a man of about 45 years old, which was a respectable middle to old age for the Copper Age. He stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall and was lean and wiry, well suited to a life in the mountains. His body was a roadmap of a hard life. His lungs were blackened with soot, likely from a lifetime spent near open fires and smoky huts. He had hardened arteries, gallstones, and a nasty infestation of whipworms in his gut. He also suffered from joint wear and arthritis, particularly in his knees and ankles. Incredibly, his body was covered in over 60 tattoos, arranged in small groups of parallel lines and crosses. These weren't decorative. They were located over areas of joint degeneration and acupuncture points. It's believed they were a form of primitive therapeutic treatment, an attempt to soothe his chronic pain. This suggests a man who was not just living a hard life, but was actively trying to manage his physical toll. But it was the items he carried with him that provided the most profound insight into his status and his final journey. His gear was a masterclass in Copper Age survival technology. He wore sophisticated clothing made from the hides of at least 5 different animals, including a bearskin cap, a coat of stitched goat and sheepskin, and leggings made of goat hide. His shoes were remarkably complex, with bearskin soles, deerskin uppers, and an inner lining of netting stuffed with grass for insulation. His toolkit was equally impressive. He carried a birch bark container likely used to carry hot embers, allowing him to start a fire quickly. He had a quiver full of arrows, though most were unfinished, suggesting he was in the process of rearming himself. He also carried a flint dagger in a woven scabbard and a mysterious tool known as a retoucher, used for sharpening flint tools. He even had a small first aid kit containing 2 types of fungus with known antibiotic and styptic properties. But the most significant item of all was his axe. The handle was made of yew wood, and the blade was 99.7% pure copper. In Ötzi's time, copper was a new and revolutionary technology. The knowledge of how to smelt it from ore was a closely guarded secret, and possessing a solid copper axe was the equivalent of owning a luxury sports car today. It was a symbol of immense wealth and high social standing. This was no ordinary man. He was likely a chieftain, a powerful warrior, or a respected leader in his community. And this is where the mystery deepens, because this incredibly valuable axe, this ultimate status symbol, was left with his body. If the motive for his murder was robbery, the killer would have surely taken the most valuable object Ötzi possessed. The fact that it was left behind suggests a different, more personal motive. This wasn't a random mugging, it was a targeted assassination. The contents of his stomach provided another crucial set of clues, a forensic timestamp for his final hours. Analysis revealed the remains of 2 distinct meals. The older meal consisted of cereals and plants, eaten perhaps 8 to 12 hours before his death. But the more recent meal, consumed just an hour or 2 before he was killed, was much heartier. It consisted of the fatty, dried meat of an ibex, a type of wild mountain goat, and meat from a red deer, along with inkhorn wheat. This last meal is incredibly telling. It suggests that shortly before his death, Ötzi felt safe enough to stop and eat a substantial meal. He was not in a frantic, headlong flight. He was high in the mountains, in his element, refueling for the next leg of his journey. The attack, when it came, was a complete surprise. He was ambushed, likely by someone he knew, someone who knew his route and could track him through the treacherous terrain. Further analysis has added even more layers of complexity. Isotopic analysis of his tooth enamel, which forms in childhood, shows he grew up in a valley south of the Alps in what is now Italy. However, analysis of his bones, which remodeled throughout life, suggests he spent his adult years further north. He was a man who moved between different regions, a man with a complex life history. And then there is the pollen. Microscopic pollen grains trapped in his digestive tract and on his clothing act as a geographical fingerprint. The pollen from his last meal came from a mid-altitude forest, indicating he had been down in the valley not long before his final ascent. The sequence of different pollens he ingested charts his path. He moved from the lower valley up through a coniferous forest and into the high alpine zone where he met his end, all within a span of about 36 hours. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes not from Ötzi's body, but from his equipment. In 2003, scientists performing DNA analysis on his belongings made a startling discovery. They found traces of human blood from 4 different individuals. There was Ötzi's own blood on his cloak, but on his flint knife there was the blood of one person. On one of his arrows, the blood of a second person, and on his coat near the front, the blood of a 4th individual. This discovery blows the case wide open. It confirms that the defensive wound on his hand was not from a minor scuffle. He was in a brutal, close-quarters fight in the day or two leading up to his murder. He had wounded at least 2 of his opponents with his knife and arrow. The blood on his coat might belong to a wounded comrade he had carried, or perhaps an enemy he had grappled with. So, what is the leading theory? The evidence points to a scenario of escalating conflict within Ötzi's own community. He was a man of high status, which often breeds jealousy and rivalry. A power struggle may have erupted. Ötzi was involved in a violent fight, perhaps a battle for leadership. He was wounded, but he fought back, injuring his attackers and managing to escape. He fled to the one place he felt safe, the high mountains. He knew the paths, the shelters, the resources. He was likely trying to cross the pass to seek refuge with an allied group or to simply disappear. But at least one of his enemies, a skilled hunter and archer, followed him. The pursuer tracked him relentlessly, finally catching up to him in the high pass. Waiting for the opportune moment, when Ötzi's back was turned, the assassin drew his bow and ended the 5,300-year-old feud with a single, silent shot. But even this compelling narrative leaves questions unanswered. Who were the people whose blood was on his weapons? Was it a single assassin, or was he pursued by a group? Was the conflict over power, resources, or something more personal, like a dispute over a woman or territory? Why did he stop for a meal if he knew he was being hunted? Some researchers have even proposed alternative theories. Could it have been a ritual sacrifice? It seems unlikely, given the evidence of a prior struggle and the nature of the ambush. Others have revisited the idea of an accident, suggesting the arrowhead was an old injury and he died of exposure combined with his head wound from a fall. But the lack of clotting around the arrowhead wound strongly indicates it was the immediate cause of death. Ötzi's case is a stark reminder that the deep past was not a peaceful, primitive idyll. It was a world of complex social dynamics, of power, status, and brutal violence. His perfectly preserved body has given us an unprecedented look into that world, but the identity of his killer and the precise reason for his murder are secrets that died with him on that lonely mountain pass. The ice preserved his body, but it could not preserve the truth. And so, the world's oldest murder mystery remains unsolved, a chilling, cold case written in blood and frozen in time. From the cold, sterile ice of the high Alps, our investigation now descends into a completely different environment, one equally adept at preserving the secrets of the dead. We travel forward in time nearly 3,000 years to the Iron Age, around 400 BCE. Our destination is the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark, a landscape of rolling hills, heathland, and dark, acidic peat bogs. For centuries, these bogs have been a source of fuel for local communities. As workers cut the peat into bricks for drying, they have occasionally made startling discoveries. They have unearthed the bodies of men, women, and children, their skin tanned a dark brown, their hair turned a coppery red, but their features so perfectly preserved that they look as though they have only recently passed away. These are the bog bodies, silent witnesses to a mysterious and often violent past. In May of 1950, two brothers, Viggo and Emil Højgaard, were cutting peat in the Tulland bog when their spades struck something soft. Brushing away the dark, wet peat, they uncovered a face. It was the face of a man, his eyes gently closed, his mouth set in a calm, serene expression. His skin was wrinkled and dark, but his stubble was visible on his chin. He wore a pointed cap of sheepskin and a hide belt, but nothing else. Around his neck was a tightly drawn braided leather noose. The brothers were convinced they had found a recent murder victim, perhaps a student from a nearby town who had gone missing. They immediately contacted the police in the town of Silkeborg. The police, equally perplexed by the fresh appearance of the body, brought in an archaeology professor, Peter Glub. Glub took one look at the body, the context in which it was found deep within the ancient peat layers, and knew this was no modern crime. This man had been dead for over 2,000 years. He became known as the Tulland Man, and he is perhaps the most famous and enigmatic of all the bog bodies. The acidic, oxygen-poor environment of the bog had worked a strange kind of magic on his remains. While his bones were largely decalcified and softened, his skin, hair, and internal organs were preserved in astonishing detail. It was as if he had only just laid down for a nap, a peaceful image that stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the instrument of his death still cinched around his neck. An autopsy was conducted, a strange procedure for a man who had died before the time of Christ. The findings were clear. The noose, which left deep grooves in the skin under his chin and on the sides of his neck, was the unambiguous cause of death. He had been hanged. There were no other signs of trauma, no broken bones, no wounds. His heart and other organs were in good condition for a man estimated to be around 40 years old. But this was not a simple execution. The care with which his body had been treated suggested something far more complex. After his death, his eyes and mouth had been gently closed. His body was not just dumped into the bog. It was carefully placed in a fetal position, as if sleeping. He was laid on his side, his legs drawn up. It was a posture of rest, of peace, a deliberate and respectful arrangement. This careful burial, combined with the violent death, pointed towards a chilling conclusion. The Tulland Man was the victim of a ritual human sacrifice. He was killed as an offering to the gods of the bog. This theory, while shocking, is supported by a wealth of archaeological and historical evidence. The bogs were sacred places for the Iron Age peoples of Northern Europe, seen as gateways to the supernatural world, a place where one could commune with the gods. To understand why a man would be killed and placed so carefully in a bog, we must try to enter the mindset of the people who put him there. These were farming communities, their lives dictated by the changing seasons and the success of their crops and livestock. Their world was filled with powerful, often capricious nature deities who controlled fertility, weather, and fortune. Appeasing these gods was a matter of life and death for the entire community. Roman writers, such as the historian Tacitus, writing a few centuries after the Tulland Man's death, described the Germanic tribes of the region as practitioners of human sacrifice. He wrote of them consecrating groves and woods to their gods, and of appeasing them with the blood of both criminals and chosen victims. The bogs, with their misty, otherworldly atmosphere, would have been the perfect natural temples for such rituals. But was the Tulland Man a criminal being punished, or an honored individual chosen for a sacred duty? The evidence seems to point towards the latter. The serene expression on his face has captivated observers for decades. While some of it may be a result of the post-mortem processes in the bog, it lacks the contorted features of a typical violent strangulation. This has led some to speculate that he went to his death willingly, believing he was performing a vital service for his people. Further evidence for the ritualistic nature of his death came from the analysis of his digestive tract. His stomach and intestines were so well preserved that scientists could identify the ingredients of his final meal. He had eaten a kind of porridge or gruel made from barley, flax, and a variety of wild seeds, including chamomile and knotweed. In total, some 40 different types of seeds and grains were identified. What is striking about this meal is what it lacks. There was no meat, no fruit, no fresh greens. It was a simple, almost humble meal composed of ingredients that would have been available even in the dead of winter. Some scholars believe this specific recipe may have been a ritual meal consumed by the sacrificial victim before their death. The sheer variety of wild seeds, some of which were not common foodstuffs, suggest a special preparation. Imagine the scene. It is a cold day in the Iron Age. The community has gathered at the edge of the sacred bog. The Toland man, chosen for his role, eats his final ritual meal. He is then led to a gallows or a tree, the braided leather noose placed around his neck. He is hoisted into the air, and his life is offered to the gods who dwell in the dark waters below. After he is dead, his body is taken down. His eyes are closed by a loved one or a priest. His body is carried to the edge of the bog and gently lowered into the peat, arranged in a position of eternal sleep. The offering is complete. The community hopes that their sacrifice will ensure a bountiful harvest, fertility for their people and animals, or victory in an upcoming conflict. For them, this was not murder. It was a sacred and necessary act. But this interpretation, however compelling, is not without its challenges. We are looking at this event through a modern lens, imposing our own understanding of religion and violence onto a culture that is profoundly alien to us. We can never truly know what the Toland man was thinking, or what the people who killed him intended. Was he a respected member of the community, a king or a priest who gave his life for his people? Or was he an outcast, a criminal, or a captive from a rival tribe, whose death served as both punishment and offering? The careful treatment of his body suggests respect, but it's not definitive proof. Even a criminal could be offered to the gods as a way of cleansing the community of their transgression. His age, around 40, is also significant. He was not a young man, but a mature adult, a man in the prime of his life. This might suggest he was a person of some standing, whose sacrifice would be considered more valuable than that of a youth or an elder. His hands and feet were well manicured, showing no signs of heavy manual labor, which has led to speculation that he was a member of the elite. The Toland man is not alone. Hundreds of bog bodies have been discovered across northern Europe, from Ireland to Poland. Many of them show signs of a violent death. There is the Graubow man, also from Denmark, who died around the same time. His throat was cut from ear to ear with such force that it sliced into his vertebrae. Yet, like the Toland man, his body was carefully placed in the bog. Then there is the Lindo man, found in England, who suffered a triple death. He was struck on the head twice with a heavy object, garroted with a sinew cord, and had his throat cut. This ritual overkill suggests an act of immense symbolic importance. Each body tells a slightly different story, but they all point to a culture where ritual violence was an accepted and perhaps essential part of life and death. The mystery of the Toland man is therefore not who did it. In a sense, his entire community was responsible. The real mystery is why. What specific crisis prompted his sacrifice? Was it a famine, a plague, a war? Was he chosen by lottery, or did he volunteer? Did he feel honored, or was he terrified? His peaceful face offers no answers. It is a mask of tranquility that conceals a world of ancient belief and brutal practice. He is a testament to the immense power of faith, a power that can lead people to commit acts that we, in our modern world, find almost incomprehensible. He is both a victim and a sacred offering, a man murdered by his own people for their own salvation. Today, the head of the Tulland man is on display at the Silkeborg Museum in Denmark. He rests in a climate-controlled case, an archaeological treasure, and a forensic marvel. Thousands of people come every year to gaze upon his face, to look into the serene features of a man who died 2,400 years ago. They are drawn in by the deep human connection that transcends time. But as we look at him, we are also confronted by the vast, unbridgeable gap between our world and his. We can analyze his last meal, map the grooves on his neck, and date his death with scientific precision. But we cannot understand the minds of his killers or the meaning of his death. The Toland man's case is solved in a forensic sense, but in a historical and human sense, it remains one of the most profound and disturbing mysteries of the ancient world. His silence is absolute, and the bog keeps its secrets well. Our next case takes us out of the cold, misty lands of Northern Europe and into the hot, sun-drenched heart of one of the world's greatest ancient civilizations. We travel to Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, to the year 1155 BCE. This is the New Kingdom, a period of immense power and wealth, but it is an empire in its twilight years, beset by internal strife and external threats. On the throne sits Ramesses III, a man considered to be the last great pharaoh of his era. For over 30 years, Ramesses III had ruled Egypt with a strong hand. He had fought off invasions from the Sea Peoples, a mysterious coalition of maritime raiders, and had initiated massive building projects, seeking to emulate the glory of his famous predecessor, Ramesses the Great. His reign was a final, brilliant flash of power before a long period of decline. But behind the golden facade of the royal court, a deadly plot was brewing, a conspiracy born of ambition, jealousy, and a thirst for power that would ultimately bring down the pharaoh himself. For thousands of years, the story of this plot was known only through a handful of surviving papyrus documents, most notably the judicial papyrus of Turin. These ancient court records detailed the trial of a group of conspirators accused of plotting to assassinate the pharaoh. The plot, which has become known as the Harem Conspiracy, was allegedly orchestrated by one of Ramesses III's secondary wives, a queen named Tai. Ti's motive was simple and timeless. She wanted her own son, a prince named Pentaweret, to inherit the throne instead of the pharaoh's chosen heir, the future Ramesses IV. To achieve this, she gathered a cabal of high-ranking officials around her, including palace administrators, army commanders, royal servants, and even magicians. It was a sprawling conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the Egyptian state. According to the papyri, the plotters intended to use a combination of black magic and direct violence. The documents speak of them creating magical wax figurines to curse the pharaoh and his loyal guards, and of inciting a rebellion in the provinces to create chaos. The ultimate goal was to kill Ramesses III and install Pentaweret as the new ruler of Egypt. The court records are clear about the outcome. The plot was discovered, and the conspirators were arrested, put on trial, and found guilty. Their punishments were severe, with many being forced to take their own lives. But for all their detail about the plot and the trial, the ancient texts were maddeningly ambiguous on one crucial point. Did the conspiracy succeed? Did they actually manage to kill the pharaoh? The documents refer to Ramesses III in the past tense, using the honorific "the Great God," which was typically reserved for a deceased king. Yet, they never explicitly state that he was murdered as a result of the plot. For centuries, historians debated his fate. Had he survived the attempt on his life, only to die of natural causes shortly after, allowing him to oversee the trial of his would-be assassins? Or was the trial a posthumous affair, carried out by his successor to clean house and solidify his own power? The answer to this 3,000-year-old question lay hidden, wrapped in linen, within the pharaoh's own mummified remains. The mummy of Ramesses III was discovered in the 1880s in the Deir el-Bahri royal cache, a secret tomb where the bodies of many New Kingdom pharaohs had been reburied by ancient priests to protect them from tomb robbers. For over a century, the mummy was studied and x-rayed, but it offered no obvious clues about his cause of death. He was a man in his 60s with signs of arthritis and hardening of the arteries, but no apparent fatal injuries. The mystery remained until 2012, when a team of scientists, led by the renowned Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass and the paleopathologist Dr. Albert Zink, decided to re-examine the pharaoh using modern, non-invasive technology. They placed the mummy of Ramesses III into a state-of-the-art computed tomography CT scanner, a machine that could create detailed, three-dimensional images of his body, peering through the layers of linen bandages without disturbing them. As the images appeared on their computer screens, the researchers held their breath. They scanned down from the head to the neck, and suddenly, the secret that had been hidden for 3 millennia was revealed in stark, undeniable detail. Across the pharaoh's throat was a massive, gaping wound. A blade had sliced deep into his neck, severing his trachea, his esophagus, and all the major blood vessels. The cut was over 2.5 inches wide and went almost to the spine. It was an injury that would have caused immediate death. There was no question. The harem conspiracy had succeeded. Ramesses III had been brutally assassinated. The discovery was a bombshell in the world of Egyptology. It was the definitive forensic evidence that confirmed the hints in the ancient papyri. The assassins had reached the pharaoh, likely getting close to him under the guise of their official duties within the palace, and had cut his throat. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly effective. The last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom did not die peacefully in his bed. He was murdered in a bloody palace coup. But the CT scan revealed even more. The embalmers who had prepared the pharaoh's body for the afterlife had made a desperate attempt to conceal the manner of his death, or perhaps to magically heal him for his journey into the next world. They had packed the deep wound with linen and resin. And, in a fascinating detail, they had placed a small carved stone amulet of a Horus eye inside the wound. The Horus eye was a powerful ancient Egyptian symbol of protection, healing, and restoration. It was as if they were trying to magically make the pharaoh whole again to allow him to be reborn in the afterlife without this horrific injury. This discovery rewrote the final chapter of Ramesses III's life. He was not the triumphant survivor who brought his enemies to justice. He was their ultimate victim. The trial of the conspirators was conducted by his son and successor, Ramesses IV, who needed to legitimize his rule by publicly punishing his father's murderers and eliminating any rivals to the throne. But the story doesn't end there. The investigation into the pharaoh's death led the researchers to another, even more bizarre and disturbing mummy, a body that had puzzled Egyptologists for over a century. This was the mummy known as Unknown Man E, discovered in the same royal cache as Ramesses III. From the moment he was found, Unknown Man E was an anomaly. Unlike the other royal mummies, who were carefully embalmed, wrapped in fine linen, and placed in ornate coffins, this man had received a bizarre and dishonorable burial. His body was not properly mummified. His internal organs had not been removed, and he had simply been left to dry out in nature and salt. He was then wrapped not in pure white linen, but in a ritually impure sheep or goat skin. For the ancient Egyptians, who believed proper burial was essential for a successful afterlife, this was a terrible fate, a deliberate act of damnation. Most shocking of all was the man's face. It was contorted in an eternal scream, his mouth wide open, his neck muscles strained. He became known as the Screaming Mummy. For years, his identity was a complete mystery. Was he a Hittite prince who had died in Egypt? A disgraced official? The reason for his agony-filled expression and his shameful burial was unknown. Dr. Hawass and his team decided to use the same modern techniques on unknown man E that they had used on Ramesses III. They took DNA samples from both mummies to see if there was any genetic link between the powerful pharaoh and this screaming, dishonored man. The results were astounding. The DNA analysis proved with a high degree of certainty that unknown man E was the son of Ramesses III. Suddenly, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The screaming mummy was almost certainly Prince Pentaweret, the son of the treacherous Queen Tai, the young man at the center of the harem conspiracy. He was the one who was meant to take the throne after his father's murder. With his identity revealed, the scientists took a closer look at his body to understand his cause of death. The CT scans of his neck and chest showed compressed and wrinkled skin folds around his throat, and his chest was hyperinflated. These are classic signs of death by strangulation or hanging. The judicial papyrus states that after he was found guilty, Pentaweret was allowed to take his own life. In ancient Egypt, this was a form of honorable execution for high-ranking nobles, often carried out by poison or forced suicide. It seems that Prince Pentaweret, his plot in ruins and his father dead, was either executed by hanging or forced to hang himself. His tormented expression was not the result of a painful disease, but the final, agonizing moments of his life, suffocating at the end of a rope. His shameful burial in a goatskin was his final punishment, an attempt to deny him a proper afterlife and erase his treacherous legacy. He was to be damned for eternity for his crime against the divine order. The combined forensic and genetic evidence tells a complete, chilling story that reads like a Shakespearean tragedy. A queen, hungry for power for her son, masterminds a plot. Assassins, armed with sharp blades, slip through the pharaoh's security and murder him in the heart of his palace. The plot is discovered, and the heir apparent, Ramesses IV, rounds up the conspirators. The ringleader, Prince Pentaweret, is captured and either executed or forced to kill himself. He is then buried in a way designed to punish him for all time. This is one of the rare instances in ancient history where archaeological science and historical texts align perfectly to solve a murder mystery. The CT scans provided the physical proof of the crime. The DNA evidence identified the key players, and the ancient papyri provided the motive and the narrative. It is a stunning example of how modern technology can reach back through millennia and uncover the truth of a crime that was meant to be hidden forever. Yet, even with all these answers, some questions linger. Who were the actual assassins who wielded the knife? The papyri named dozens of conspirators, from high officials to lowly servants, but the identity of the killer or killers is never specified. How did they get so close to a heavily guarded pharaoh? Was it an inside job of the highest order, involving his most trusted bodyguards? The silence of the historical record on these final, bloody details leaves room for the imagination to wander through the shadowy corridors of the ancient Egyptian court, a place where the pursuit of power could lead to the most brutal of betrayals. We now leave the gilded courts of Egypt and travel back in time, deeper into the prehistoric past, to a world without pharaohs, without written records, without even the knowledge of metal. Our investigation takes us to the late Neolithic period, approximately 5,000 years ago. The location is a quiet field near the village of Košice in southern Poland, a region that was, in the Stone Age, home to early farming communities. In 2011, during the construction of a new sewage system, workers unearthed something that stopped them in their tracks, a collection of human bones. Archaeologists were immediately called to the site, and they began a careful excavation. What they uncovered was not a typical burial, but a scene of shocking and intimate violence. It was a mass grave, a single large pit containing the remains of 15 individuals. As the skeletons were carefully cleaned and exposed, the horror of their final moments became terrifyingly clear. Every single one of them had been killed by violent blows to the head. Their skulls were shattered, crushed by a powerful blunt force. This was not a battle. There were few other injuries, no defensive wounds on their arms. This was a systematic execution, a brutal and merciless slaughter. But it was the arrangement of the bodies that was most perplexing. They were not thrown into the pit haphazardly. They were laid to rest with a strange and poignant tenderness. The bodies were arranged carefully, side by side. A mother was buried with her child held close to her. Two young brothers were laid next to each other, their heads touching. It was a scene of both savage brutality and profound grief. The people who buried them clearly knew the victims, loved them, and wanted to give them a respectful final resting place, even in the midst of this unspeakable tragedy. This discovery, which became known as the Koshiche massacre, presented a chilling and deeply personal mystery. Who were these people, and who could have committed such a horrific act, only to then bury the victims with such care? To answer these questions, scientists turned to the most powerful tool in modern archaeology, ancient DNA analysis. An international team of researchers extracted DNA from the teeth of the skeletons. The results of their analysis were both groundbreaking and heartbreaking. They were able to reconstruct an entire family tree. The 15 individuals in the grave were all members of one extended family, spanning 3 generations. There were 4 women, one of whom was a mother between 35 and 50 years old. There were 8 children and adolescents ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers. And there were 3 young men. DNA analysis confirmed the intimate relationship suspected from the burial arrangement. The woman buried cradling a child was indeed his mother. The 2 young men laid side by side were brothers. Another woman was buried with her 2 sons, one a teenager and the other a young boy. It was a family portrait, rendered in bone and brought to life by genetics. They had lived together and they had all died together on the same terrible day. This genetic evidence makes the scene even more shocking. This was not an act of war between 2 rival tribes where casualties are expected. This was the targeted annihilation of a single family. The victims were predominantly women and children, the most vulnerable members of any community. They were executed with extreme prejudice, their heads systematically smashed in. But the DNA analysis also revealed a crucial clue about who was not in the grave. Of the 15 individuals, there were no older men. The only adult males present were 3 young men, likely older sons or nephews. The fathers, the grandfathers, the experienced adult men of the family were conspicuously absent. This has led to a powerful and tragic theory about what happened. It is likely that the men of the family were away when the attack occurred. Perhaps they were on a hunting trip, a trading expedition, or tending to livestock in a distant pasture. While they were gone, their settlement, their home, was attacked. The assailants, whoever they were, rounded up the women, children, and remaining young men and systematically murdered them. Then, the men of the family returned. They came home not to the sounds of their children playing or the smell of a cooking fire, but to an unimaginable scene of horror. They found their wives, their sons, their daughters, their sisters, all slaughtered. In their overwhelming grief, they did the only thing they could. They gathered the bodies of their loved ones and buried them together in a single grave, arranging them in a way that reflected their family bonds. A final, desperate act of love in the face of absolute devastation. This scenario is emotionally compelling and fits the archaeological evidence, but it still leaves the central question unanswered. Who were the killers and what was their motive? The answer may lie in the broader historical context of the time. The late Neolithic in Europe was a period of massive social upheaval. This was the era of the globular amphora culture to which the Košice family belonged, known for their distinctive pottery and their transition to a more pastoral, livestock-herding lifestyle. At the same time, new groups were migrating into Central Europe from the east, most notably the people of the corded ware culture. These newcomers brought with them new technologies, new social structures, and new belief systems. It was a time of intense competition for land, resources, and influence. The landscape of Europe was a violent and contested place. One theory is that the Košice family fell victim to this clash of cultures. They may have been attacked by a rival group, perhaps members of the expanding ported ware culture, in a dispute over territory or livestock. The attackers, seeking to eliminate their rivals completely, targeted the family's future, their women and children. This kind of brutal, total warfare is sadly common in periods of cultural conflict and competition for resources. Another possibility is that the violence was not external but internal. The massacre could have been the result of a feud within the globular amphora culture itself, a conflict between different clans or villages that escalated to a horrific conclusion. In small-scale societies, disputes over property, marriage rights, or perceived insults can fester and explode into extreme violence. But the careful burial still presents a puzzle. If the killers were a rival tribe, would they have allowed the surviving men to return and perform a respectful burial? It seems unlikely. This might lend more weight to the theory that the surviving men were the ones who buried their family. However, another interpretation is possible. Perhaps the killers themselves performed the burial. In some cultures, even in acts of extreme violence, there are ritualistic components and a belief in treating the dead in a specific way to appease their spirits. The arrangement could have been part of a dark ritual performed by the very people who committed the murders. We are left with a crime scene that is both intimately personal and historically significant. The Košice massacre provides a grim, microscopic view of the violence that characterized this turbulent period of European prehistory. It reminds us that behind the abstract archaeological terms like globular amphora culture and corded ware migration are real human beings, real families who lived, loved, and died in a world far more brutal than our own. Unlike the case of Ramesses III, there are no texts to guide us. Unlike Ötzi, there are no perfectly preserved bodies or equipment to analyze. All we have are the bones, the DNA, and the heartbreaking arrangement of a family laid to rest 5,000 years ago. The identity of their killers is lost forever, a secret swallowed by the earth. The case forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. The capacity for such focused, merciless violence against the innocent is the deeply unsettling part of our shared history. The Košice grave is a silent monument to a forgotten tragedy, a testament to a family that was erased from the world in a single, horrific act of violence. Their story, pieced together from the clues in their bones, is a chilling reminder that the roots of human conflict run deep, back to the very dawn of settled society. For our final case, we move forward in time to the Bronze Age, a period of rising chiefdoms, long-distance trade, and increasingly sophisticated warfare. We return to Germany not far from the modern town of Helmsdorf. The year is approximately 1940 BCE. This is the era of the Unetič culture, a powerful and wealthy society that controlled the trade routes for amber and tin, and whose elites were buried in lavish tombs filled with bronze weapons and gold ornaments. One such tomb, a massive burial mound or barrow, was excavated back in 1877. Inside, archaeologists found the skeleton of a man who was clearly a person of immense importance. He was buried in a wooden chamber at the center of the mound, and with him were a bronze dagger, a bronze axe, a bronze halberd, and several gold ornaments, including hair rings and a bracelet. He was dubbed the Prince of Helmsdorf, a powerful chieftain who had ruled over this region almost 4,000 years ago. For over a century, the prince's skeleton was simply another archaeological artifact, a testament to the wealth and power of the Bronze Age elite. It was assumed he had died of natural causes at the end of a long and successful life. But in the 21st century, as with so many of our other cases, a new generation of scientists decided to take a closer look, applying the techniques of modern forensic anthropology to these ancient bones. What they found transformed the Prince of Helmsdorf from a symbol of status into the victim of a brutal, premeditated murder. The re-examination of his skeleton revealed not one, but 3 distinct and severe injuries, all inflicted by a sharp, bladed weapon, most likely the type of bronze dagger that was common among the Unetice elite. The first injury was a powerful thrust into his abdomen. The blade had gone in so deep that it had nicked his lumbar vertebra, the bone of his lower spine. This would have been a devastating wound, slicing through his internal organs and causing massive bleeding. It was almost certainly a fatal blow on its own. But the attacker was not finished. A second blow was delivered to his upper back. The dagger blade had split his left shoulder blade and likely punctured his lung. This too would have been a lethal injury. The precision and power of these 2 strikes, targeting the body's core, suggest an attacker who was an experienced and skilled warrior, someone who knew exactly how to kill. There was also a third injury, a cut on his left forearm. This is a classic parry fracture, a defensive wound sustained when someone raises their arm to block an incoming attack. This single mark on his bone tells a powerful story. The Prince of Helmsdorf did not die without a fight. He saw his attacker coming, he tried to defend himself, but he was ultimately overwhelmed. This was no accident, no random act of violence. The evidence points to a close-quarters, face-to-face confrontation that ended in a calculated and ferocious killing. The Prince of Helmsdorf, one of the most powerful men of his time and place, was assassinated. This forensic evidence forces us to reimagine the world of the Bronze Age. It was not just a time of technological advancement and growing wealth. It was also a time of high-stakes politics, of intense rivalries, and of deadly power struggles. The prince's death was likely a political assassination, one of the earliest that can be proven through direct forensic evidence. To understand the motive, we must understand the society in which he lived. The Unetice culture was one of the first truly hierarchical societies in Central Europe. Power was concentrated in the hands of a small warrior elite whose status was displayed through their control of prestige goods like bronze and gold. These chieftains ruled over local populations, controlled trade routes, and engaged in both alliances and warfare with their neighbors. Power in such a system is inherently unstable. A chieftain's position was not guaranteed by birthright alone. It had to be maintained through strength, charisma, and the loyalty of his followers. A strong leader would be constantly on guard against challenges, both from within his own community and from rival chieftains seeking to expand their territory. The Prince of Helmsdorf's murder could have been the result of several different scenarios. The first is a classic coup d'état. Perhaps a rival within his own inner circle, a younger brother, a nephew, or an ambitious warrior, saw an opportunity to seize power. The attack was personal and direct, suggesting the killer was someone who could get close to the prince, someone he may have even trusted. A confrontation in the chieftain's hall, a heated argument that escalates into violence. The challenger draws his dagger. The prince raises his arm to defend himself, but it is too late. The assassin is faster, stronger, or more ruthless. He delivers 2 fatal blows, and the prince falls. The challenger then steps forward to claim his position as the new leader, perhaps even arranging the lavish burial for the man he just murdered as a way of legitimizing his own succession and showing respect for the office, if not the man. Another possibility is that the killer was an external enemy, The prince may have been ambushed or killed in a duel by a rival chieftain. The Bronze Age was a time of endemic warfare, and the leaders of these societies were also their lead warriors. A targeted strike against the leader of an enemy group would be a highly effective way to destabilize them and gain an advantage. The skilled nature of the attack certainly suggests the killer was a seasoned fighter, a peer of the prince in the warrior ethos of the time. What makes this case so compelling is the contrast between the violent death and the honorable burial. Despite his brutal murder, the prince was interred with all the pomp and ceremony befitting his high rank. He was placed in a monumental tomb, surrounded by the symbols of his power. This is a fascinating contradiction. If he was killed by a rival, why would they afford him such a grand funeral? This suggests that the act of killing him was separate from the respect he commanded in death. It may be that the social rules of the time demanded that a man of his status, regardless of how he died, be buried in a specific way. Or, as mentioned before, if the killer was an internal usurper, a lavish funeral would be a crucial part of the political theater needed to smooth the transition of power and show the community that the proper order was being maintained. The Prince of Helmsdorf's case opens a window into the brutal political realities of prehistoric Europe. It shows that the Game of Thrones is not a modern invention. The struggle for power and the willingness to kill for it is a recurring theme throughout human history. His skeleton, with its silent, violent wounds, is a 4,000-year-old piece of evidence from a political crime. Like our other cases, the ultimate mystery remains unsolved. We can prove he was murdered, we can reconstruct his final moments of struggle, and we can speculate about the political motives. But we will never know the name of his killer. We will never know the specific grievance or ambition that led to the fatal confrontation. Was it a betrayal by a trusted friend? The culmination of a long-standing blood feud? A calculated strike by an enemy in the dead of night? The dagger that killed him, likely a finely crafted bronze weapon very similar to the one he himself carried, is long gone. The witnesses to the crime have been dust for 4 millennia. All that is left is the victim, his bones telling a tale of power, betrayal, and a violent end. The Prince of Helmsdorf reigns now only over a silent tomb, a cold case from the dawn of Europe's age of metals, a testament to the timeless and deadly nature of human ambition. From the frozen Alps to the sun-baked Nile, from the misty bogs to the Neolithic plains, we have journeyed through millennia of human history, guided by the silent testimony of the dead. We have seen a high-status man ambushed on a mountain pass, a willing or unwilling sacrifice given to the gods, a powerful pharaoh assassinated in his own palace, a family systematically slaughtered in their home, and a prince cut down by a rival's blade. These 5 cases, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, are windows into the darkest corners of the human soul. What is so shocking about these murders is not just their brutality, but their intimacy. These were not anonymous acts of violence. The killer of Utsi likely knew him, tracked him, and understood the significance of the copper axe he chose to leave behind. The people who hanged the Tolan man were his own community, participating in a ritual they believed was essential for their survival. The assassins of Ramesses III were members of his own court, his own family, driven by an ambition that festered behind palace walls. The murderers of the Koshice family targeted women and children, a deliberate act of annihilation against people they knew. And the man who stabbed the Prince of Helmsdorf was likely a peer, a member of the same warrior elite who looked him in the eye as he fought for his life. These ancient cold cases demonstrate the incredible power of modern science to illuminate the past. Through CT scans, DNA analysis, and isotopic studies, we can reconstruct events with a clarity that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. We can give these long-dead victims a voice, allowing them to tell us the story of their final violent moments. We have become forensic investigators for history itself. Yet, for all that science can tell us, it has its limits. It can reveal the how, but it can rarely, if ever, reveal the who or the definitive why. The motives, the emotions, the conversations, the betrayals, these are lost to the silence of the ages. The faces of the killers are forever shrouded in the mists of time. We can build theories, we can create compelling narratives based on the evidence, but we cannot achieve the certainty of a modern conviction. The trail has gone cold beyond recovery. And perhaps that is why these stories continue to fascinate us. They are the ultimate unsolved mysteries. They challenge our desire for closure, for a neat resolution where justice is served and the guilty are punished. They remind us that history is not a clean, orderly progression of events, but a messy, often brutal, and deeply human story. They show us that the past is not a foreign country, but a reflection of ourselves. For the same passions that drove these ancient killers, greed, jealousy, power, and fear, are still with us today. These victims are more than just archaeological curiosities. They are individuals who lived, breathed, and felt just as we do. Their violent deaths are not just historical data points. They are human tragedies that still resonate across the vast expanse of time. As we continue to develop new scientific techniques, we may yet uncover more clues, more details about their lives and deaths. But the central mysteries will likely remain, a permanent and humbling reminder that some secrets, once buried by time, can never fully unearthed. The cases remain open.